has emerged victorious in its battle against the Players Association. While you have not read that there has been a settlement, while you have not seen an agreement and the start of the WNBA season, I am guaranteeing you that Adam Silver and the other WNBA owners will emerge victorious from this negotiation, because the WNBPA, the Players Association, is an outright mess.
As the calendar moved closer to the deadline that had been publicly discussed by Adam Silver, tensions surrounding negotiations between the Women's National Basketball Players Association and the leadership of the Women's National Basketball Association continued to build. Behind the scenes, conversations about strategy, communication, and expectations were unfolding within the players' union itself. During February of 2025, a development occurred that quickly became one of the most talked about moments in the negotiation process. Two prominent figures within the league, Kelsey Plum and Breanna Stewart, decided to send a detailed letter to the union's executive director, Terry Jackson. The message reportedly addressed concerns about the progress of negotiations and the communication between union leadership and players. The letter itself spanned several pages and expressed frustration about the pace of discussions and the clarity of information being shared with players. While internal disagreements are not uncommon in large organizations, the expectation in most labor negotiations is that such concerns remain strictly private. In professional sports unions, maintaining a unified public front is often considered essential to preserving negotiating strength. Even when players disagree internally about strategy, those disagreements are typically handled through internal meetings and confidential discussions. However, the situation took an unexpected turn when the contents of the letter were leaked to the media, with coverage appearing on outlets such as ESPN. Once the document became public, the narrative surrounding the negotiations began to shift almost immediately. For league management and team owners, the leak provided insight into the internal dynamics of the Players Association. Observers began speculating about whether the union was completely unified in its approach to negotiations or whether significant disagreements were emerging among its members. According to the perspective shared by former sports executive David Sampson, moments like this can dramatically alter the balance of power during labor disputes. When one side of a negotiation appears divided, the opposing side may feel less pressure to compromise quickly. In many historical cases across professional sports, internal divisions within a union have encouraged management to adopt a more patient strategy. Instead of rushing toward concessions, executives may simply wait while disagreements within the players' organization create additional strain. The leak of the letter therefore became more than just a news story. It became a signal that the negotiation environment had changed. What had previously appeared to be a unified group of players advocating for collective goals now looked more complicated from the outside. For fans and analysts watching the situation unfold, the moment raised important questions about how the negotiations might progress in the coming months. Would the union succeed in rebuilding a strong, unified message, or would internal tensions continue to influence the course of the discussions?
Just yesterday, Kelsey Plum and Breanna Stewart wrote a letter to the Players Union Executive Director, a woman named Terry Jackson, who's been there for years and has done, in their mind, a very good job, wrote a letter basically saying, you don't talk to us. Quoting Barbra Streisand and Neil Diamond, you don't bring us flowers anymore. It used to be so natural for us to talk, but used to be's don't count anymore. What's going on here?
That level of confidence being expressed is not coming from guesswork or random commentary. When someone like David Sampson speaks about labor negotiations in professional sports, it carries a different level of weight. Sampson is not simply another analyst sitting in a studio speculating about what might happen behind closed doors. He spent years on the inside of the system as the president of the Miami Marlins in Major League Baseball, where collective bargaining battles between owners and players are part of the landscape. He understands how negotiations unfold, how pressure tactics are used, and how power dynamics shift when one side gains even the smallest strategic advantage. That is why his recent comments about the ongoing tensions between the Women's National Basketball Players Association and the leadership of the Women's National Basketball Association have sparked so much conversation. According to Sampson, the situation may not be as balanced as many players believe. From his perspective, the leverage that some members of the union think they possess might not actually exist in the way they imagine. Sampson explained that in high-stakes labor disputes, perception is often just as important as reality. If one side believes it has the upper hand, it can push harder during negotiations. But if the other side quietly holds more structural power, financial resources, scheduling control, or public narrative influence, the outcome can shift quickly once those advantages become clear. In his analysis, Sampson suggested that many players within the WNBA may be underestimating how experienced league leadership is when it comes to navigating labor disputes. Professional sports leagues have dealt with these battles for decades, from lockouts to contract disputes and revenue-sharing debates. Owners and executives frequently prepare for these conflicts years in advance, building strategies designed to withstand pressure from unions and public criticism. That preparation, Sampson argues, often leaves players at a disadvantage unless the union remains extremely disciplined and unified. When players believe they can apply pressure through public opinion or media attention, it can sometimes create the illusion of leverage. But experienced negotiators know that patience can be one of the most powerful tools in their arsenal. From Sampson's viewpoint, the real danger for players is assuming that management will eventually give in if enough pressure is applied. In many historical cases across professional sports, the opposite has happened. Owners simply waited longer, relying on their financial stability and organizational structure to outlast the players' demands. What makes this moment particularly significant for the WNBA is the growing popularity of the league and the increasing spotlight surrounding stars like Caitlin Clark and other high-profile players. The league is experiencing unprecedented attention, larger television audiences, and a wave of new fans discovering women's basketball. But as Sampson warns, popularity alone does not automatically translate into negotiating power. For players to truly influence the outcome of a collective bargaining fight, they must maintain a united front and carefully manage the internal dynamics of their own organization. Without that unity, the leverage they believe they have could disappear far more quickly than anyone expects.
You better get a deal done or we're not going to be able to get the season underway and we're going to have a real problem. All of a sudden, the players' union seems fractured. First, you get a story that comes out is now, while they had voted to approve a strike, now there could be some dissension in the ranks about whether or not they should call for a strike. There seems to be some dissension within the ranks about whether what the WNBA is offering at the table should be accepted in large part so that they can get their season going. There is absolute panic on behalf of the players. And when you know that
What makes this entire situation even more complicated is the timing. The WNBA is entering one of the most important moments in its history. Television ratings are climbing, arenas are filling up in cities that previously struggled to attract crowds, and social media engagement has exploded. Much of that attention is tied directly to the league's new generation of stars, particularly players like Caitlin Clark, who have drawn millions of new eyes to the sport. For the first time in years, the WNBA feels like it is on the edge of a major breakthrough. That is exactly why the current labor battle carries such enormous consequences. In negotiations like these, timing can be everything. When a league senses momentum and growth, management tends to become extremely cautious about giving away too much power in a labor deal. Owners know that the next few seasons could determine the long-term financial future of the league. If television deals expand, sponsorships increase, and ticket demand continues to rise, the value of the league could climb dramatically. From the ownership perspective, locking in favorable terms before that growth fully materializes is a strategic priority. And according to Dave Sampson's analysis, that is precisely the position the league now finds itself in. On the other side of the table, the players believe they are finally in a position of strength. For years they have argued that the league's revenue potential was underestimated and that their salaries do not reflect the growing popularity of women's basketball. Many players feel that this new surge of attention proves their point. They believe that if the league is entering a new era of growth, then the athletes responsible for that growth deserve a significantly larger share of the financial rewards. That belief has fueled the push for a new collective bargaining agreement that would increase salaries, improve travel conditions, and expand long-term benefits. But Sampson argues that the players may have misread the negotiating landscape. In his view, the union's internal disagreements have weakened the leverage they thought they had. When management sees division among players, it changes the entire strategy. Instead of rushing to compromise before a deadline, owners can slow the process down and allow tensions within the union to grow. Negotiations become less about meeting demands and more about waiting for the opposing side to lose patience or unity. That strategy has been used countless times in professional sports, and history shows it can be extremely effective. The leaked letter from Kelsey Plum and Breanna Stewart, whether intentional or accidental, may have played directly into that dynamic. It revealed that some of the league's biggest stars were frustrated with how negotiations were being handled internally. Even if their concerns were legitimate, the public exposure of those frustrations created a perception of instability within the Players Association. For experienced executives, that kind of signal is incredibly valuable because it suggests that the union may struggle to maintain a single, unified position as talks continue. As the calendar moves closer to the next round of negotiations, the stakes are becoming clearer for everyone involved. Players want recognition, financial growth, and better working conditions that match the rising popularity of their sport. Owners want financial stability and long-term control as the league attempts to expand. Somewhere between those goals lies the eventual agreement that will shape the future of the WNBA. But if Sampson's warning is accurate, the players may need to rebuild their unity quickly, because in high-stakes negotiations like this, perception of strength can matter just as much as actual leverage.
There's one thing you can't do. You can't let anyone else know that. Because once the other side knows about the fracture, they stick their leg in it and they use one of those expanders that open your chest cavity and expose your beating heart. You certainly do not write a letter that you know is going to get leaked. For those of you who are going to complain about leaks, inside the industry, the sports industry, every email we write, every letter we write, every correspondence with the fan.
The moment that intensified discussion around these negotiations arrived when Adam Silver, the commissioner of the National Basketball Association, addressed the media during a major basketball event and introduced a specific deadline tied to the future of the Women's National Basketball Association. Silver publicly stated that March 10 should be considered the target date for reaching a new collective bargaining agreement. If progress was not made by that point, he warned that the timeline for the upcoming season could become uncertain. As soon as those remarks were made, the message spread rapidly through sports media. Headlines began to appear across major outlets discussing the possibility of disruptions to the next WNBA season. Fans quickly started asking whether they might lose the chance to watch some of the league's biggest stars return to the court. For many supporters of the sport, the idea that the season could be jeopardized created immediate concern. The league has been experiencing a surge in popularity, with players like Caitlin Clark drawing record television audiences and selling out arenas across the country. The possibility that labor negotiations could interrupt that momentum was unsettling to fans who had only recently begun to follow the WNBA more closely. However, according to analysis offered by former sports executive David Sampson, the significance of that March 10 deadline may not be exactly what it appears on the surface. Sampson argues that deadlines in labor negotiations often function as psychological tools rather than rigid points of no return. In many cases, management sets a visible timeline not because it represents an absolute cutoff, but because it places pressure on the opposing side. This tactic has been used repeatedly across professional sports leagues. By announcing a date publicly, executives create a sense of urgency that can influence how players and unions approach the negotiation process. The pressure can cause players to worry about the potential consequences of missing the deadline, which may lead them to push their own representatives to reach an agreement more quickly. From Sampson's perspective, this strategy serves another purpose as well. When pressure increases, internal tensions within a union can become more visible. Players may begin to disagree about how aggressively they should negotiate or whether they should accept certain compromises to avoid risking the upcoming season. If those disagreements start to surface publicly, management gains valuable information about the union's internal dynamics. Negotiators can then adjust their strategy based on the perception that the players may not be completely aligned. In the current WNBA negotiations, Sampson believes that the announcement of the March 10 deadline functioned exactly this way. By introducing a clear date and tying it to the possibility of a disrupted season, league leadership effectively shifted the emotional pressure toward the players and their union representatives. Whether the deadline ultimately proves to be flexible or firm remains to be seen. But one thing is certain: the moment it was announced, the psychological landscape of the negotiations changed dramatically.